Thank you. I'm mainly going to tell you a few stories. Stories that highlight the hidden potential in our mundane day-to-day actions. And stories that explain why I gave up on a conventional, stable career for one dedicated to the battle against flashing standby lights, rotting tea bags, and cluttered car boots. But first, some context. Climate change, child slavery, the rise of obesity and diabetes, and the decline of fish stocks. Some of the most pressing challenges of our time, yet you probably feel pretty powerless to do anything about them. Perhaps, like most others, you believe that the responsibility falls onto government and big business to take action. That it's their actions that have the biggest influence, importance, and impact. But I disagree. I believe that that is subconsciously a diversionary tactic, a way to shift the impetus away from us and onto them. Because after all, who are governments and business? They're us, made up of people like you and me, driven by people like you and me, people with values, beliefs, and attitudes. And it's those values, beliefs, and attitudes that influence our decisions, both personal and professional, but they're shaped by our actions. And so really, it all comes down to our actions. Let me rewind a bit. I used to think that the place I could have the biggest impact on the environment was by working for government or big business. And so I went back to university to do a master's, where I learned a lot about the process of international climate negotiations, environmental economics, the climate change law, and politics. I was on track for a strong career in environmental policy. But then three things happened. Firstly, I learned that 42% of the UK's carbon emissions are a result of individuals' actions. 42%. That's almost half of our emissions in our control right now, today. Secondly, I realized that whilst the remaining 58% of our emissions fall largely down to business and government, if they're really going to change and transform, it's going to take more than just the sustainability and CSR departments. It's going to take transformation that requires leaders throughout the organizations to start thinking differently and start acting differently. The third thing that happened was that I cycled to Morocco. That's going to take a little bit more explanation. Cycling from London, from Clapham Common nonetheless, to Morocco was going to be no mean feat. The furthest I'd ever cycled before was from Basingstoke Station to my parents' house, about 9 miles. I'm a diabetic and I have a metal femur. 2 years before, I was learning to walk again after a particularly undramatic rollerblading accident. So it was going to be a challenge. But I saw that challenge as an opportunity to raise support for the cause that I'm so passionate about, sustainability and the environment. The traditional thing to do would have been to ask friends to donate money to my chosen environmental charity. But I felt uncomfortable asking people for money. They were broke. It was the beginning of the credit crunch, and they were tired of endless Just Giving requests. But mostly, I realized that the environment doesn't need their cash as much as it needs their action. There seemed to be something futile in people donating generously only to hop in their car to drive half a mile to the supermarket, leaving their lights on at home, and then a week later, throwing half the food in the bin anyway. And that's when the ridiculous realization hit me. If I'd gone down that traditional route, I would have asked my friends for money so I could donate it to a charity, so that they would then spend it on running a campaign to encourage those very same people to cycle to the shops, to turn their lights off, to waste less food. But I knew that because of a thing called social learning theory, my friends were far more likely to listen to me, a friend of theirs, than a distant charity, especially if I told them that I was cycling to Africa. And so, we asked our friends to support us by doing simple actions, like cycling to the shops. washing their clothes at 30 degrees, or using reusable water bottles. The response was phenomenal. I would be nervous that people would think I was preaching and nagging at them a bit, but in fact, everyone was really grateful for the opportunity to do something and to feel involved and part of our challenge. And honestly, the thought of their actions and support seriously motivated me. The idea of my housemate going vegetarian really drove me up those hot, endless hills of the Moroccan Atlas. I'm a bit of a data nerd, and so I took great care in calculating the carbon saving of each and every pledge made. And I worked out that whilst Sarah and I had saved 2 flights to Morocco by cycling there, the small actions of our 216 supporters added up to save as much carbon as 84 flights from London to Morocco. 84 flights. That was when I realized just how true that old cliche is, that our small actions really do add up to make a big difference. And those 84 flights were saved just over the 2 months alone. Imagine how much would be saved if those actions turned into long-term habits. Well, 6 years later, I still have many of my parents' friends proudly telling me that they still think of me every time they wash their clothes and turn it back down to 30 degrees. Honestly, there's nothing so flattering as constantly being associated to people's laundry. And that they're still doing their actions should be no surprise. Behavioral scientists have deduced that you have to do something for 21 days in order to form a habit, or 66 days, depending on which research you listen to. And so, 6 years later, many of our friends have formed habits that stuck. But it was about a lot more than just their pledged actions. Some people started to talk to others about what they were doing, influencing their friends. A story that I still love is of a girl called Zara. She pledged to go vegetarian and found herself out at dinners with her friends asking her, "Zara, why aren't you eating meat?" She'd say, "Oh, well, because these girls I know are cycling to Morocco." "What?" they would say. And the whole conversation would start up about the importance of our actions, sustainability, and the impact of the meat industry. And so Zara started to educate and inform her friends, all in a way that was so much more socially acceptable than her just piping up, "Oh, eating meat's bad, you shouldn't do it." And I should caveat here, I'm not a vegetarian, and I don't believe we should all go vegetarian. I love a good beef stew, and I'm far too pragmatic. But I just don't think we have to eat it every single day. Other people's actions were the trigger for more changes. Turning the thermostat down led to draft-proofing the windows, led to insulating the loft. Some people started to talk to their colleagues about what they were doing, putting posters up and joining green teams, putting pressure on their workplaces to take action on sustainability. Attitudes changed too, and my sister's a great example of this. She used to be very much of the attitude of climate change. It's not something I can worry about. I've got kids, I live in the country, I need a car. And anyway, the council leaves their lights on all the time, so why should I do anything? And her attitude's now shifted to I recycle, I don't waste any food, I holiday in the UK. I'm doing my bit, so I'm going to tell my council to do theirs. Another story that I love, but I can't take any credit for, is that of a guy called Paul. I met Paul on a bike ride a few years ago. He runs a cycle shop in Kent. He used to work for a big pharmaceutical company, living the classic life of a corporate hotshot, with long, traffic-heavy commutes, late nights, and frequent flights. One day, his car was in the garage, and so he decided to cycle the 10 miles to work instead. And he enjoyed it. He did it again. It began to become a regular thing. He got fit. He had time to reflect. And in doing so, he began to realize that there was a different way of doing things, that the status quo wasn't always right. And so Paul started to question the need for all the transatlantic business flights. He started to question the need for some of the practices of the pharmaceutical industry. And eventually, he quit and went to set up his bike shop, a decision that he still traces back to that initial cycle to work. And so what all of this teaches me is that our actions matter. They have a direct impact today that we can measure, but they also have knock-on impacts that, whilst harder to pin down, could be transformational. But it also taught me that where we can have the biggest impact isn't through our own actions. It's through inspiring and influencing those around us to take action. And so, much to my parents' horror and my own surprise, instead of going into a career in environmental policy, I set up DoNation, a site that anyone can use to run campaigns, much like our own, asking their friends, family, or employees to make simple personal pledges. Over the last few years, we've had lots of people use DoNation. From Mark Wood, who skied solo, unsupported to the North and South Poles, asking local school children to support him and get involved in his challenge by making pledges. To Lindsay and Paul, who asked for pledges instead of wedding gifts. To Innocent Drinks, who are currently running a competition between their European offices to see which can make the most pledges and save the most carbon, really actively involving their employees in their sustainability strategy. My hope is that in the future, people like Paul won't have to quit their jobs in order to create change in the world. Instead, through DoNation, they'll be able to create change from within their workplace, where they could have much more impact. One of my favourite stories is that of Pip and Shem. Shem ran the Leeds Half Marathon a few years ago and used DoNation to raise support. Pip worked with Shem and quite fancied him, so she thought she really ought to support him. She pledged to take shorter showers, making sure to think of Shem every time she stepped in the shower, reminding her to keep it sharp. I'm not sure how much she'll like me saying this. A few months later, Pip ran a 10K herself, raising 121 pledges through DoNation, two of which came from Shem, who she is now dating. But the story doesn't end there. A year later, Pip persuaded her company to sign up to DoNation, to use a business program. She had always been seen as the office eco-hippie because she was vegetarian. So she was surprised when Veg Out became the most popular pledge. It all started when one of the senior analysts, your typical steak-loving Frenchman, pledged to cut 8 meat meals out a week. This caught on and the competitive spirit kicked in, and an Irish colleague raised the stakes by going vegetarian full-time. And then the plight of the Irishman and the Frenchman caught on, and other colleagues came on board. And suddenly, Pip was no longer the crazy eco-hippie. Instead, her colleagues were coming to her, asking for advice and veggie recipe ideas. I said earlier that I am a bit of a data nerd, and so we take great care in following up with all of our users to find out the impact that we've had. One stat that comes out again and again and really highlights why I see so much potential in behavior change is that 95% of our users experience other benefits aside from carbon saving. 2/3 improve their well-being, a half improve their health, others save time, money, waste, etc., etc. So even if, for whatever reason, you don't believe in climate change, the actions we can do to combat it just make sense. But no matter how much emphasis I place on the importance of behavior change, we can't ignore policy altogether. Clearly, governments and businesses play a huge role in shaping the future of climate change and our planet. And at no time is that more true than now, as world leaders prepare to meet in Paris for the 21st Conference of the Parties on Climate Change. But our leaders need permission from their people to take strong action. They need to know that we're behind them in acting on climate change. And that's why, over the coming weeks, many people will be taking to the streets, marching, signing petitions, writing open letters. But is it not true that our actions speak louder than our words? Surely the better way of getting heard would be by taking action. And I'm not talking about tying ourselves to trees and climbing up power stations. That kind of thing isn't for everyone. I'm talking about simple, personal, everyday actions that we can all take. That's why we're cycling to Paris next month, in mid-December, asking people to support us through their own actions. So far, 173 people have supported us. We're hoping to reach thousands. Our hope is to show our leaders that people care about climate change so much that they're changing their lifestyles to help combat it. Surely that sends a message that will be hard to ignore. But at the very least, our supporters will experience a direct benefit from their actions. They'll reduce their carbon footprint, they'll improve their health, they'll save some money, they'll feel a bit good about themselves. And they might change attitudes. And here's the key thing, that will influence their decisions. And if they're in positions of influence, that could have a huge impact. But ultimately, what we're hoping to show people is that we are far from powerless when it comes to the battle against climate change. Thank you.